In 1994, there was a country that owned the third largest nuclear arsenal on Earth. 1,900 strategic warheads, more than Britain, France, and China combined. And that country did something no nation had ever done, before or since. It gave them away. Every single one. Not for money, not for territory. For a piece of paper, 1 page, 5 signatures, in which 3 powers promised to respect its borders and never use force against it. The country was Ukraine, and one of the 3 signatures at the bottom of that page belonged to Russia. 28 years later, the country that signed became the country that crossed. And the largest war in Europe since 1945, a war that was supposed to take 3 days and is now in its 5th year, began between 2 nations that half the world had been told were brothers. So this is the question we're investigating tonight. What happens between brothers that a signed promise couldn't survive? Fair warning, this story is still being written, but its beginning isn't. Its beginning is 1,000 years old. Let's follow the evidence. Start where both nations start, the same place. A medieval state called Kievan Rus, golden domes on a great river, a capital of Slavic civilization 1,000 years ago. Both Moscow and Kiev call this their birth certificate. One problem with the family photo. When Kiev was building cathedrals, Moscow did not exist. Not was small, did not exist. It appears in the record 2 centuries later as a frontier outpost in the woods. The elder brother, it turns out, is the younger one. Then the Mongols burn Kiev. The center of gravity moves north, and centuries later, Moscow claims the inheritance. In 1654, Ukraine's Cossacks, squeezed between empires, sign a protection agreement with the Tsar, Pereyaslav. Moscow's reading, reunification forever. Kiev's reading, an alliance that it never got permission to leave. 370 years later, those are still the 2 readings. Every war needs a story. This one has 2. About the same river. Now here's where this investigation found something worth pausing on. The idea that Ukraine isn't a real nation, the claim at the heart of 2022, is not new. It's imperial paperwork. 1863, the Tsar's interior minister, in writing, a separate Ukrainian language never existed, does not exist, and cannot exist. 13 years later, an imperial decree bans Ukrainian books outright. Think about that logic. You don't ban a language that doesn't exist. Then came the 20th century, and the price stopped being books. 1932. Stalin collectivizes the countryside. The grain quotas rise past what the land can give, and in Europe's breadbasket, between 3.5 and 5 million Ukrainians starve to death, while the Soviet Union exports grain. Ukraine and some 30 countries today call it genocide. Russia's official position calls it a shared Soviet tragedy, not a targeted one. We'll give you both framings, that's our job. But here's the fact nobody disputes. When Ukrainians hear brotherly nation, this is the century they remember. Memory is the terrain everything else is built on. December 1st, 1991. The Soviet Union is dying, and Ukraine votes on one question: independence? 92% say yes. Every region votes yes, including, write this down, we'll need it later, Crimea. Weeks later, the USSR is gone, and Ukraine wakes up sovereign. Inside the blast radius of an inheritance, thousands of Soviet warheads on its soil. Instant nuclear superpower. number 3 on Earth. And the New World's powers, Washington, London, Moscow, all want those weapons gone. So in Budapest, in 1994, the deal is struck. Ukraine surrenders every warhead. In return, respect for its borders and a commitment never to use force against it. Now, the lawyers in the audience already spotted it. The document offers assurances, not guarantees. No army is pledged, no alarm is wired to it. If the paper fails, the paper fails. Ukraine's leaders knew and signed anyway, because a young, broke country can't feed itself with warheads it can't even launch. It was, at the time, the reasonable choice. History has a drawer for those. Keep your eye on that page. It's the whole story, folded. For its first 2 decades, independent Ukraine tried the impossible sport, standing on 2 boats. Trade with Russia, flirt with Europe, promise everyone everything. In 2004, the balancing act cracked. A rigged election and a candidate for the European path who, mid-campaign, was poisoned with dioxin, his face scarred on live television. He survived. 1 million people stood in the snow in orange. The rigged result was thrown out. Moscow watched a crowd in Kiev overturn its preferred outcome and took notes. Then, 2008, Bucharest, NATO's summit. Ukraine asks for a membership path. The alliance can't agree, so it produces a compromise sentence, and I want you to hear how carefully it fails. Ukraine and Georgia will become members of NATO. Will. Someday. No date, no plan, no protection. Analysts on every side of this argument have called that sentence the worst of both worlds. Loud enough to alarm Moscow, empty enough to defend no one. A promise that functioned as a target. 4 months later, Russia fought a 5-day war in Georgia, the other country in the sentence. The preview screened. Almost nobody watched it twice. 2013. Ukraine's president, under heavy pressure from Moscow, abandons the European deal his own government finished negotiating. Students go to the square. The square becomes a city. In February 2014, security forces open fire. Around 100 protesters die on camera, and the president flees to Russia. Moscow calls it a Western-backed coup. Kyiv calls it a revolution against a president who shot his own citizens. Both of those sentences are doing work. We've given you both. What happens next is not ambiguous, because the man in charge later confirmed it on camera. Within days, soldiers in unmarked uniforms, Moscow calls them local self-defense, then later admits they were Russian troops, seize Crimea. A referendum is organized in 3 weeks, under occupation, and claims 97%. The United Nations General Assembly votes 100 to 11. Invalid. Remember 1991? Crimea, free, unoccupied, voted for Ukrainian independence. Same peninsula, 2 referendums, 1 at gunpoint. Pick which one you'd cite. Then the East, armed uprisings in the Donbass, Russian-armed and increasingly Russian-staffed. A Malaysian airliner falls out of the sky. 298 civilians. A Russian missile, says the international investigation and a Dutch court. Ceasefires are signed in Minsk and never quite cease. For 8 years, Europe files it under frozen conflict. The freezer, meanwhile, kills 14,000 people. 2014 didn't end anything. It was the dress rehearsal that everyone reviewed and no one canceled. July 2021. The President of Russia publishes an essay, 5,000 words. Title: On the Historical Unity of Russians and Ukrainians. Its argument: one people, artificially divided. Ukrainian statehood, an anti-Russian project on historical Russian land. Nations don't usually publish their reasoning in advance. Read today, it's less an essay than a legal brief for what came next. That autumn, nearly 200,000 troops gather on Ukraine's borders. Exercises, says Moscow. And then the strangest prelude to war in modern history. American intelligence starts reading the invasion plan out loud, publicly, with dates, while Moscow calls it hysteria. An invasion, announced by its target's allies, denied by its author, right up until the missiles confirmed the schedule. February 24th, 2022, 4:50 in the morning, Kyiv time. Missiles strike more than 20 cities at once. Paratroopers grab for an airfield outside the capital. The plan, by every serious reconstruction, was days. Take Kyiv, remove the government, install a friendly one. 3 days, give or take. Here's what the plan didn't price in. The airfield assault fails. The 40-mile armored column pointed at Kyiv stalls, starves, and turns around. And the president, a former comedian, a man who literally played an accidental president in a sitcom before becoming one, is offered evacuation and answers as widely reported, "I need ammunition, not a ride." Say what you want about casting directors. History has range. Then the war showed the world what it was. When Russian forces withdrew from the Kyiv suburbs, investigators, UN, OSCE, independent, documented what was left behind in towns like Bucha. We won't show it. We'll say it plainly. Civilians executed. Moscow denies it. The documentation is extensive. That spring, the word brotherly left the conversation. And the ironies kept arriving on schedule. The war meant to stop NATO's expansion? Finland joined. Then Sweden. NATO's border with Russia doubled. The war to prove two nations were one people has manufactured the deepest separation in their 1,000-year story. Autumn 2022. Russia annexes 4 more regions. While not fully controlling them, the UN votes 143 to 5 against. And the 3-day war ground into years. Mobilizations, counteroffensives, a drone war, a war on the power grid. A line that moves by meters and is measured in lives. So, year 5. Roughly a fifth of Ukraine under occupation. Combined casualties that credible estimates now count in the hundreds of thousands, killed and wounded, on each side of the line. Truces declared, and broken within days. Majorities in both countries telling pollsters they want negotiations, while the shells keep landing. We've walked this ground before on this channel, and the pattern holds. This was never ancient hatred. It's what it always is. An empire ending, and refusing to finish ending. A denial written down in 1863, published again in 2021. And a piece of paper that traded away 1,900 warheads for a promise. A promise whose failure is now studied in every capital that owns a bomb, or fears a neighbor who does. That may be this war's longest shadow. The next country asked to trade its weapons for assurances has now seen how that story can go. Our other investigations ended at a border ceremony, a divided city, a line on a map. This one can't end that way, because this one isn't history yet. The last page of that paper is still blank. And somewhere between the trench lines and the negotiating tables of this decade, someone, maybe someone watching this, is going to write it. Until then, the evidence stays open on the desk. Sleep well.